Hiroshima and Nagasaki, two names that have become enduring symbols of the most terrifying destruction ever inflicted by human hands. Amid the rubble, the blazing fires, and the cries of survivors, the world witnessed for the first time the devastating power of a completely new kind of weapon, the atomic bomb. But what led to that decision? Why did the United States, already on the verge of victory in World War II, choose to drop not one, but two atomic bombs on Japan? In this video, we'll take a deep look into the full historical context, the alternative options that may have existed, the painful consequences, and the often forgotten truths behind this pivotal moment, one that would forever change the course of global history.
When World War II erupted in 1939, Europe quickly became the main battleground between the Axis and Allied powers. On the Western Front, Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler swiftly invaded Poland, France, and several neighboring countries, dragging the continent into a brutal spiral of warfare. Meanwhile, in the East, Japan, an ally of Germany and Italy, had already begun expanding its territory long before. As early as the 1930s, Japan had occupied Manchuria in northeastern China, then pushed further south, launching full-scale invasions into Shanghai, Nanjing, and across eastern China. With ambitions to become the dominant power in Asia, Japan annexed Korea, moved into French Indochina, occupied parts of what is now Vietnam, and soon seized control of the Philippines, then a U.S. territory. Japan's goals weren't limited to land acquisition. It also sought control over Southeast Asia's vast natural resources, especially oil, rubber, and iron ore. This expansion directly threatened the strategic and economic interests of the United States and other Western powers in the region. The tipping point came on December 7, 1941, when Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy's strategic base in Hawaii. More than 2,400 Americans were killed, and numerous battleships were destroyed. That attack thrust the United States into World War II. Once involved, America focused on two major theaters, Europe and the Pacific. While the Allies gradually pushed back German forces in Western Europe, the war in the Pacific against Japan proved extraordinarily brutal. Japanese forces were known for their fierce resistance and willingness to fight to the death, often resorting to suicide attacks and refusing to surrender. This made every battle for each island a bloody and costly ordeal for American troops. From the pivotal Battle of Midway to the grueling campaigns at Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, each American victory came at the cost of tens of thousands of lives. The Pacific War became a long, grinding battle of attrition, marked by treacherous terrain, harsh climate, and desperate, unyielding Japanese resistance. By mid-1945, Germany had surrendered unconditionally following Hitler's death, officially ending the war in Europe. However, in Asia, Japan remained defiant, rejecting all calls to surrender. U.S. military leaders realized that to end the war decisively, they needed a final, overwhelming blow, one that would shock Japan into unconditional submission. And so, the plan to deploy the most secretive and devastating weapon the United States had ever developed, the atomic bomb, was brought to the table.
As the war spread across continents, the most secretive and high-level military project in American history quietly took shape, hidden from the public and even from most government officials. This was the Manhattan Project, a top-secret program launched in 1939 to research and develop the world's first atomic bomb, spurred by warnings from some of the world's leading physicists that Nazi Germany might be pursuing a similar weapon of unimaginable power. A letter from Albert Einstein to President Franklin D. Roosevelt was one of the catalysts that set this new chapter of modern warfare into motion. The Manhattan Project brought together thousands of scientists, engineers, and nuclear specialists from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. Among them were towering figures like theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, later known as the father of the atomic bomb, and Italian-born Enrico Fermi, who created the first self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction. Many brilliant Jewish scientists who had fled fascist regimes in Europe also joined the effort. With an unprecedented budget of $2 billion at the time, equivalent to tens of billions today, the project spanned multiple ultra-secret locations, including Los Alamos in New Mexico, Oak Ridge in Tennessee, and Hanford in Washington. Their mission was singular: to successfully create a weapon powered by nuclear energy, specifically the energy released when atomic nuclei are split apart. After years of grueling research and risky experimentation, the Manhattan Project reached a historic milestone in July 1945, with the first successful test of a nuclear bomb, codenamed the Trinity Test. In the remote desert near Alamogordo, New Mexico, a plutonium-based bomb was detonated in the air. What followed stunned even the scientists who had built it. A massive orange fireball erupted, forming a mushroom cloud that rose tens of kilometers into the sky. The shockwave leveled everything within miles. The success of the Trinity test marked a turning point that could not be undone. The United States now possessed a weapon capable of obliterating an entire city in seconds. But with this scientific breakthrough came a creeping sense of dread for many involved. While some celebrated the strategic edge America had gained, others, especially Oppenheimer himself, felt deep unease. Quoting a passage from the Hindu scripture Bhagavad Gita, Oppenheimer famously said, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Yet personal doubt could not outweigh the cold political and military calculations facing the U.S. government. With Japan still refusing to surrender, America faced a historic decision. Should they unleash this terrible new weapon to force an unconditional surrender, or prolong the war with conventional fighting, risking the lives of potentially millions more soldiers and civilians? The answer would not come at the negotiating table, rather through a silent bomb bay door over the skies of Hiroshima.
Once the United States had successfully developed the atomic bomb, a quiet but deeply consequential debate erupted within the highest levels of American leadership. Was there any other way to force Japan's surrender without resorting to a weapon of such catastrophic power? At the time, three main options were considered. The first was to continue the ongoing economic and military blockade of Japan, cutting off all food, fuel, and raw materials in hopes of starving the country into submission. But Japan, already enduring relentless firebombing across more than 60 cities and facing extreme shortages, showed no signs of backing down. Japanese military leaders vowed to fight to the last man, embracing death for the emperor as the ultimate form of honor. The second option, and perhaps the most discussed, was a full-scale invasion of the Japanese mainland, known as Operation Downfall. The plan called for more than 5 million American troops, with two major assaults: the invasion of Kyushu in late 1945 and the assault on Honshu in early 1946. However, intelligence reports revealed that Japan had already mobilized millions of soldiers and civilian militias, including women and children trained to use spears and carry out suicide attacks. Estimated casualties were staggering. At least 500,000 to 1 million American troops could be killed, and Japanese deaths might reach several million, not to mention the near total devastation of the country. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who would later become president, opposed the use of the atomic bomb, yet even he acknowledged that such an invasion could turn Japan into a massive graveyard. The third option was diplomatic: to negotiate Japan's surrender. On paper, this seemed like the most humane approach. However, during the Potsdam Conference in July 1945, the US, Britain, and China issued the Potsdam Declaration, demanding Japan's unconditional surrender under threat of prompt and utter destruction. Japan rejected the ultimatum, partly because they hoped to secure more favorable surrender terms, and partly because they were determined to preserve the emperor system, which was regarded as sacred and untouchable in Japanese culture at the time. Facing Japan's unwavering resistance and the grim prospect of immense American casualties from a prolonged war, President Harry Truman and his advisors came to a fateful conclusion. Using the atomic bomb was not merely a military decision, it was a strategic move to end the war as swiftly as possible, minimize American losses, and send an unmistakable message of power to the rest of the world, especially to the Soviet Union. And so 2 cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were chosen as the targets. Neither had been heavily bombed before, making them ideal for showcasing the full destructive potential of this new weapon. With that decision, the United States set in motion a turning point in human history, one that would change the course of warfare, diplomacy, and global power.
On the morning of August 6, 1945, the skies over Hiroshima were clear and calm. Though the city was an important military center, it had remained largely untouched by previous bombings. Civilians went about their routines as usual, unaware that within minutes, their entire city would be wiped off the map. At exactly 8:15 a.m., a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets and flying at nearly 10,000 meters, released the first atomic bomb ever used in human history, a uranium bomb codenamed Little Boy. In just 43 seconds, the bomb descended over the heart of Hiroshima and detonated approximately 600 meters above the ground. In less than 1 second, a fireball hotter than 1 million degrees Celsius erupted, brighter than the sun itself. Everything within a 1.5-kilometer radius was instantly incinerated. Homes, schools, bridges, entire neighborhoods reduced to ash. Those closest to the blast vanished without a trace. Skin was seared off bodies, flesh burned and fused to melting asphalt. The shadows of victims were scorched into walls, ghostly imprints frozen in time at the exact moment of death. In the blink of an eye, Hiroshima became a living hell. The shock wave ripped through the city, destroying nearly every structure in its path, while flames and ionizing radiation continued to consume the survivors. Many didn't die instantly, but succumbed in the following days to burns, radiation sickness, dehydration, and psychological shock. Within the first few minutes, between 70,000 and 80,000 people were killed. In the months that followed, the death toll rose to approximately 140,000, nearly half the city's population at the time. But those numbers, as staggering as they are, fail to capture the true scale of human suffering. Children wandered among the rubble. Mothers clutched the charred bodies of their children, and hospitals already destroyed were overwhelmed with the dying and the injured. Doctors and nurses, many of them wounded themselves, did what little they could. Survivors, known as hibakusha, later recalled stepping over thousands of corpses, the stench of burning flesh thick in the air, and the endless cries for help that echoed for days. Though it was a military strike, the aftermath went far beyond tactical destruction. It was physical, psychological, and even genetic trauma that would linger for generations. With the dropping of that first atomic bomb, the world not only entered the nuclear age, it was forced to confront a haunting question. Had humanity just opened the door to its own extinction?
Just 3 days after Hiroshima was engulfed in nuclear fire, Japan still showed no clear signs of surrender. Following pre-established plans, U.S. military command decided to proceed with the second atomic strike, this time using a plutonium-based bomb codenamed Fat Man. The original target was the city of Kokura, known for its concentration of military factories and strategic weapons depots. However, on the morning of August 9, 1945, thick clouds and smoke from earlier bombings obscured Kokura's skies, making it impossible for the bomber crew to visually identify the target as required by strict mission protocols. With fuel running low and failure not an option, the crew aboard the B-29 bomber boxcar diverted to the secondary target, Nagasaki. Located in southern Japan, Nagasaki was a major industrial and shipbuilding hub with historical significance as Japan's first port for international trade. However, its mountainous terrain would prevent the bomb's energy from concentrating as destructively as it had in the flatter, more densely populated Hiroshima. At precisely 11:02 a.m., Fat Man was dropped over the Urakami Valley in northern Nagasaki. Unlike Little Boy, which used uranium, this bomb utilized plutonium and packed a more powerful punch, equivalent to roughly 21,000 tons of TNT. Although it didn't detonate directly over the city center, the explosion still unleashed a massive fireball that flattened everything within a radius of several kilometers. It's estimated that between 35,000 and 40,000 people were killed instantly, with tens of thousands more suffering severe burns, injuries, and radiation exposure. Over the following months, the death toll would rise to around 80,000, making it the second deadliest use of a nuclear weapon in history. This time, the impact on Japan was profound. The images of two entire cities obliterated in the blink of an eye shook even the most hardened members of the Japanese military command. Simultaneously, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and launched an invasion of Manchuria, delivering a crushing blow to Japan's final hope of negotiating through Moscow. Confronted with total annihilation from two fronts, Emperor Hirohito had no choice. He began preparing to deliver a historic message, something never before heard in Japanese history, a declaration of unconditional surrender. Thus, Nagasaki became not only the second city devastated by an atomic bomb, but also the final turning point in the darkest chapter of World War II. On August 15, 1945, all of Japan seemed to hold its breath. For the first time in history, the voice of the emperor was broadcast over the radio to millions of citizens. In a speech that lasted only a few minutes, Emperor Hirohito announced that Japan would accept the terms of the Potsdam Declaration and agree to surrender unconditionally to the Allied forces. Though the word surrender was never explicitly spoken, the message was unmistakably clear. For the Japanese people, who had been taught for generations that the emperor was a living deity, this was an unprecedented cultural shock. Many fell to their knees in the streets. Some wept openly, and a number of ultra-nationalist officers chose suicide over what they saw as national humiliation. But for the majority of the war-weary population, it was a long-awaited moment of relief, deliverance through tears. To formally and legally end the war, a surrender ceremony was held on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri, a powerful U.S. battleship anchored in Tokyo Bay. Representing Japan were Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu and General Yoshijiro Umezu, who boarded the ship in full military dress under the solemn gaze of hundreds of Allied commanders. Leading the ceremony on behalf of the Allies was General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in the Pacific, joined by representatives from the United Kingdom, China, the Soviet Union, France, Australia, and other nations. At the very moment the pen touched the surrender document, the world officially closed one of the bloodiest and most devastating chapters in human history. World War II had finally ended after more than 6.5 years, with an estimated 70 to 85 million people dead, nearly 3% of the global population at the time. From war-torn Europe to shattered Asia, from the horror of Auschwitz to the ashes of Hiroshima, the scars of war would linger in the collective memory of humanity for generations to come. For the United States, the victory brought both immense pride and a heavy moral burden. While the war had ended with fewer American casualties than feared, the use of atomic bombs, especially 2 in rapid succession, left a permanent and haunting stain on the conscience of mankind. And from that moment forward, the world entered a new era, the era of the Cold War, of nuclear arsenals hidden in silos and submarines, and of a silent fear that if humanity wasn't careful, Hiroshima and Nagasaki might not be the last time.
Immediately after the war ended, the world entered an ongoing and deeply complex debate. Was it truly necessary for the United States to drop 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? This was not just a military question, it was a moral, humanitarian, and even philosophical one. For many Americans, particularly veterans who had fought in the brutal Pacific theater, the decision was justified. They believed the bombings were essential to avoid a bloody ground invasion of Japan, potentially saving hundreds of thousands or even millions of lives. From a strategic perspective, many argued that without those shocking explosions, Japan would never have surrendered, and the war might have dragged on for years. Yet on the other side, numerous historians, scientists, and even members of the Manhattan Project expressed deep regret. Some asked, why didn't the US demonstrate the bomb's power on an uninhabited island? Why was it necessary to annihilate hundreds of thousands of civilians, including women, children, and the elderly, to force a government into submission? Even if ending the war was the goal, they argued, the means had crossed a fundamental moral boundary that humanity should never have breached. Others speculated that beyond military reasons, the bombings were also meant to send a warning to the Soviet Union, a wartime ally quickly becoming a post-war rival. But the consequences of the bombings went far beyond political arguments. For the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, known as hibakusha, the pain lasted a lifetime. Many developed leukemia, thyroid cancer, lung disease, liver damage, and other radiation-related illnesses that 1940s medicine was ill-equipped to treat. Pregnant women exposed to the blasts gave birth to children with severe deformities, developmental issues, or stillbirths. Tens of thousands lived with horrific burns, disfigurement, or the lifelong trauma of being socially stigmatized as victims of nuclear attack. Even decades later, children born into hibakusha families carried the fear of genetic radiation effects, despite ongoing debates within the medical community about long-term hereditary impacts. The suffering wasn't only physical, it was psychological. Survivors reported endless nightmares, survivors' guilt, and the overwhelming emotional burden of having lived through what many described as hell on earth. Faced with these horrifying truths, the international community gradually began mobilizing anti-nuclear movements. Peace organizations were founded, and a series of global treaties and non-proliferation agreements followed. Though nuclear weapons have not been eliminated, Hiroshima and Nagasaki became enduring symbols, monuments warning humanity of the devastating cost of war, hatred, and cold political decisions made without regard for ethical boundaries. And so the question, was it truly necessary to drop the atomic bombs, remains unanswered. Because it's not just a matter of history, it's a mirror reflecting the agonizing choices humanity must make between life and death, between victory and compassion, between ending one war or ushering in an even more terrifying age.
As the smoke from Hiroshima and Nagasaki still lingered in the air, the world stepped into an entirely new era, the era of nuclear warfare. The two atomic bombs dropped on Japan not only brought World War II to a close, but also marked the birth of a weapon capable of wiping out entire civilizations within hours. The sheer destructive power the United States displayed through those two explosions forced every nation, both ally and adversary, to reassess its standing in the emerging global order. Just weeks after Japan's surrender, the Soviet Union accelerated its own nuclear program. By 1949, it had successfully tested its first atomic bomb, shattering the US's nuclear monopoly. The arms race had begun, and it escalated rapidly. Within a decade, both the US and the USSR had developed hydrogen bombs, hundreds of times more powerful than those used in Japan. Thousands of warheads were deployed on submarines, bombers, and intercontinental ballistic missiles, ready to launch at a moment's notice in the event of conflict. The Cold War became one of the most tense and dangerous periods in modern history. From the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 to a series of proxy wars in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and elsewhere, the specter of nuclear annihilation loomed over humanity. A single misstep, a wrong calculation, or one pushed button could have led to global destruction. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, was born, not only as a deterrent, but as a chilling reminder of how fragile peace had become in the post-Hiroshima world. Yet, from the ashes of those first two nuclear explosions, a powerful wave of reflection and resistance began to rise across the globe. Anti-war and anti-nuclear movements flourished, particularly in the United States, Japan, and Europe. Images of hibakusha, survivors scarred by radiation, children's drawings of obliterated cities, and haunting photographs like that of a young girl wearing a white mask walking through the rubble became universal symbols of warning. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were no longer just names of cities. They became eternal reminders of the horrific cost of war, hatred, and political ambition devoid of humanity. International treaties like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, disarmament summits, and United Nations resolutions all found their roots in the haunting legacy of the atomic bomb. Even today, with numerous nations still holding and expanding nuclear arsenals, the events of 1945 have forever reshaped how humanity views war and peace. Perhaps the greatest legacy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki doesn't lie in the numbers of dead and wounded, but in the awakening of human conscience. With every commemoration, with every moment of silence, the world is reminded, one more time may be one time too many. And that may be the most enduring lesson those two bombs left behind for all of humankind.
World War II ended nearly a century ago, yet the memories of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain, an open wound in humanity's collective conscience. The two atomic bombs didn't just claim the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, they forced us to confront an unprecedented moral question. Should humankind ever possess or use a weapon capable of erasing all life on Earth in a matter of seconds? Over the course of this video, we've revisited the wartime context, the political calculations, the suffering of innocent civilians, and the profound legacy that Hiroshima and Nagasaki have left behind. While we cannot change history, we, those living today and those who will come after, can choose how we live and how we shape the world going forward. History has shown us one thing with absolute clarity. War, no matter how justified it may seem, always brings consequences far beyond its original intent. And the atomic bomb, often labeled a tool to end the war, may actually stand as the most terrifying reminder of the moral limits humanity should never cross. Today, the world's nuclear arsenals still exist, stockpiles large enough to destroy the planet many times over. That's precisely why the lessons of 1945 are more urgent than ever. To avoid repeating the same mistakes, we must face the truth, unfiltered, unvarnished, and learn from it. Not to assign blame, not to divide, but to understand. Peace is not something we inherit by default. It is a choice and a responsibility handed to each new generation. And now to you, the viewer. What do you think about America's decision to drop 2 atomic bombs in 1945? Was it a necessary act to end the war, or a moral failure humanity must never repeat? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe that history must be told truthfully so that no one ever has to live through such horror again, support this message by sharing this video. Because only when truth is known can peace truly stand a chance.